Thank you for watching. I'm Shakil 5858. I am Amir Budnam. I am thankful to all news sources and my team. Following news have been reported by American, European, Canadian, Asian, African, and Australian channels, and also by news agencies AFP, AP, and Reuters. Now the headlines. Police is trying to clear colleges' campuses from pro-Palestinian protesters. Violence in Columbia University and UCLA in California. Trump future plan when he becomes president. U.S. commander of Indo-Pacific region interview. Anthony Blinken is still working hard in Middle East to get the ceasefire in Gaza. More than 34,000 people have died in Palestine so far, according to Palestinian Ministry. Federal Reserve of America didn't change the interest rates. Florida and Arizona abortion laws have been changed. Republican efforts to remove Mike Johnson as the speaker. Labor Day rallies all over the world. Trump promised a largest deportation when he elected again. Now the news in detail.
Candlelight vigils for the victims of gendered violence as advocates have a mixed response to National Cabinet's funding pledge. US police move in to break up long-running pro-Palestine protests on college campuses. Solomon Islands Foreign Minister Jeremiah Manele to replace Manasseh Sogavare as Prime Minister. And a new study shows just how long you should sleep, stand and move every day to stay healthy. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Ruby Cornish. Thousands gathered at candlelight vigils across the country overnight as Australia continues to confront a shocking rise in gendered violence. In Melbourne, prominent landmarks were lit up in purple, with hundreds filling the Family Violence Memorial Garden in the city's east to mark National Domestic Violence Remembrance Day. There were similar scenes in towns and cities across the country as speakers shared stories about their own experiences and crowds held candles to honour those who've died. The vigils are held every year on the first Wednesday of May, commemorating women and children who've died due to domestic and family violence. In Sydney's eastern suburbs, the rain held off just long enough for a string vigil, with domestic violence survivors and politicians speaking about the need for change.
We need all governments across all departments to act and funding to be made available. Women's safety is a men's violence issue. Women cannot solve this matter alone, and women's lives matter. Enough is enough.
Men need to change their behaviours so that when there is an inkling of any disrespect for women, other men need to stand up and say that that is not acceptable in Australia.
28 women have died to gendered violence so far this year. 12 were murdered in April alone. Yesterday, political leaders agreed to measures to address the crisis, including almost $1 billion to help people leave dangerous relationships.
My experience of being in National Cabinet yesterday was that there was very strong commitment from the Prime Minister and all of the First Ministers from across the country and a recognition that we have a real crisis on our hands, and that they need to lean in and look at what all the levers that they have to really tackle this problem together.
Well, the $1 billion package agreed to at the National Cabinet meeting yesterday has received a mixed response. Political reporter Nicole Hegarty is in our Parliament House studio. Hi, Nicole. How will this funding work?
Hi, Ruby. Well, there's really two key announcements here. The first is this $925 million package, which reshapes and makes permanent a program that was first piloted under the former Morrison government. It means that this funding, which goes over 5 years, will be included in the budget to be unveiled in just short of 2 weeks. It means that women and children who are leaving violent situations will have access to support worth up to $5,000. That's both financial and other supports in terms of security and other community services that help them in the most violent of situations. The other part of this package announced yesterday at the end of the National Cabinet meeting was an agreement by the government to look at and test what technology is available to block access for children to certain misogynistic content online. That's referred to, this program of blocking access is online verification. There's some technology already existing in that area, but the government is keen to look at what is available and what's best for this particular situation. They've also committed to legislating to ban the creation and the publishing of deepfake pornography online as well, Ruby.
And Nicole, how has news of this package been received so far?
Well, the additional funding, the agreement to make sure that this pilot does continue into the future has been welcomed, as too has the focus on the digital side of things. But there's been questions about why there weren't further announcements made focusing on prevention as well as providing funding to these frontline services, which everyone accepts are in demand, currently struggling to meet existing demand, let alone servicing new demand as well. Those services particularly around providing legal assistance to women in these situations. We heard earlier today from Greens Senator Larissa Waters. Here's what she's had to say.
And I'm worried that the extension of this program without increasing the support to those services will simply increase demand, and more people who reach out for help will have to be turned away because frontline family and domestic violence services are already stretched.
The government has defended the package put forward yesterday. We've heard from the Prime Minister speaking on RN this morning saying that this is not all the government is doing. There will be further action on this. We're looking ahead to this month's budget to see what else is included in that document in terms of addressing those calls for more support for those frontline services. There's also been renewed calls on the states to deliver on a previously announced promise to employ 500 additional frontline workers. That number, we're not yet near that point of 500 being employed, so we continue to follow that closely. Ruby?
Okay, Nicole Hegarty at Parliament House, thank you. Well, tensions are high at universities across the United States after violent clashes between dueling groups of protesters over the Israel-Gaza war led to hundreds of arrests. A major brawl broke out when pro-Israel supporters attacked an encampment of pro-Palestinian protesters at the University of California in Los Angeles. Police wearing helmets and face shields moved in to separate the groups.
We were just standing right in front of our encampment, which is a right that we have, and we got pushed from all the way over there to over here. But prior to that, we had people mazing us, beating us with bats and sticks, throwing whatever they could to us, and none of this law enforcement was here at all. So it's kind of disappointing that we're seen as the perpetrators here.
There were extraordinary scenes in New York as well, with police in riot gear entering and clearing a building occupied by pro-Palestinian demonstrators at Columbia University. A protest encampment, which had inspired others across the country, was demolished. The protesters have been demanding universities stop doing business with Israel or companies that support the war in Gaza. And the movement has spread overseas, with students also protesting in Australia. Pro-Palestinian supporters have set up camp at major universities across the country. So far, they have been peaceful. Let's get more on this now with our Global Affairs editor, John Lyons. Hi, John. So we've seen these protests on campuses going for a few weeks now. Why is it now that police are getting involved?
Well, Ruby, there's now a big debate in America as to when does free speech become hate speech, if it does. And fortunately, we haven't seen those sorts of scenes in Australia, but in some of the American universities, a lot of the Jewish students are saying that this is clear anti-Semitism, this is in effect an incitement to violence. So while America, the opponents of the police action are saying that if these scenes were happening in Egypt or Hong Kong, the United States government would be condemning them. However, those who are supporting tough police action are saying that this is going beyond free speech. This is incitement. This is creating an environment where there can be violence towards Jewish students in particular because of the Gaza war. And so we're seeing some pretty ugly scenes there in America at the moment. Each university is handling it differently. It depends on the police. It depends on the head of the university and the governor of the state. Columbia University is obviously, as we're seeing here, has been so far the most violent.
Yeah, and those violent scenes, I mean, to watch here from Australia, it's concerning then to know that we're seeing protests here too. How widespread are they, and at what point are they up to?
Well, there's suggestions that some members of the Jewish community may go to Sydney University in the next 24 hours. There was, I think, some visited there during the night, and there was a bit of verbal toing and froing. So let's hope we don't see this sort of violence as they're seeing in America, because this sort of violence, apart from being bad in itself, can very quickly flow over into other parts of the community. And we've got our federal authorities, ASIO in particular, which is responsible for internal security, is concerned that the tensions occurring in the Middle East in the Gaza-Israel war may in fact spill over into the broader community.
And John, while we've got you, I also just wanted to ask you about the conflict itself more broadly. Israel says it's now allowing more humanitarian aid into Gaza. Do we know if that's true, and if it is, how significant that is?
Well, Israel is saying that. Let's wait and see what actually happens. They're promising that there'll be 350 of those large trucks a day going in there. The United Nations says they require about 500 trucks a day to feed the 2.3 million people of Gaza. My question to the Israelis would be, we're entering the 7th month now. Why is it only now that they are opening a major crossing, a land crossing, the Erez crossing, which was damaged by Hamas in that October 7 attack, but there were other ways of getting aid in there. Why has it taken 7 months?
Important questions. Global Affairs Editor John Lyons, thank you very much. We'll be keeping a close eye on those protests unfolding in Australia as they happen too. Well, infamous Victorian child killer Robert Farquharson, who's serving a life sentence for murdering his 3 children, is using new laws to launch a fresh appeal against his conviction. Reporter Nicholas Himes has the details.
Farquharson has always maintained his innocence in relation to the death of his 3 sons almost 2 decades ago now, and he's tried time and again to appeal his conviction. He exhausted all avenues of appeal when he went all the way to the High Court back in 2013. But the ABC 730 team has revealed he plans to launch a fresh appeal this year, which he will be able to do under new laws introduced in Victoria 4 years ago. Farquharson was first sentenced to life in prison in 2007 over the death of his sons, who died when he drove into a dam on Father's Day in 2005 near Winchelsea, southwest of Melbourne. He made it out of the car, but his 3 sons, aged between 2 and 10, did not. Farquharson has argued that he suffered a coughing fit and fainted in the lead up to the crash and that it was a tragic accident. That was an argument rejected by prosecutors and the jury back in 2007. That conviction was successfully appealed, but he was convicted a second time in 2024.
Top US diplomat Antony Blinken tells Hamas the time is now to agree to a ceasefire. The terror group is looking at a proposal that would see a 40-day halt in the fighting in exchange for the release of some 30 hostages. Tensions boil over at US campuses after the police swoop in to clear several pro-Palestinian sit-ins. Hundreds of students have been arrested, while pro-Israeli protesters attacked an encampment at UCLA. And the Parliament of Georgia moves a step closer to passing a controversial foreign influence law as tens of thousands demonstrate against it, fearing it will kill any hope of joining the European Union. Welcome to the France 24 newsroom in Paris. I'm Alexander Orcott. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken is pushing for Hamas to accept the latest ceasefire proposal put forward by Israel. After almost 7 months of devastating conflict in the Gaza Strip, he said, the time is now to draw it to a close and free the remaining hostages. The United States, along with mediators from Egypt and Qatar, want the fighting to end before an Israeli ground offensive is launched in Rafah.
The deal is there, said Antony Blinken this Wednesday on his 7th visit to Israel since the war broke out. Egyptian mediators have reported that these talks with the country's leaders, including Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, have progressed significantly.
If Hamas actually purports to care about the Palestinian people and wants to see an immediate alleviation of their suffering, it will take the deal. If it doesn't, I think that's further proof that it doesn't care a bit about the Palestinian people.
It's understood that the deal would bring about a 40-day hiatus in the fighting, with Palestinian prisoners swapped for Israeli hostages. This would mark the first true pause in the war, allowing for food, medical and health aid to reach civilians who are in dire need of supplies, with famine looming, according to the United Nations.
The most immediate thing that can happen to actually improve the situation for Palestinians and also create a dynamic that moves this in a different direction is the ceasefire, the hostage deal. Let's see what they do.
Hamas has previously demanded that the war be ended altogether, and one official said the group would respond soon. But Benjamin Netanyahu remains adamant that whether or not a deal is struck, he will go ahead with his plans to destroy Hamas's battalions in the southern city of Rafah. Over 1 million civilians are sheltering there, after being told by Israel to move to the city on the Egyptian border. Antony Blinken made clear that the United States would not support these actions, and the UN warned that an assault would be a, quote, unbearable escalation that would kill thousands more civilians.
Next, the President of Colombia has announced he's cutting diplomatic ties with Israel over its actions in Gaza. Gustavo Petro has been highly critical of Prime Minister Netanyahu, previously asking to join South Africa's case at the top UN court accusing Israel of genocide. Latin America has been a particularly vocal opponent of the Gaza war, with Bolivia already severing ties all the way back in October. Colombia, Chile and Honduras have already recalled their ambassadors. In response, Israel accused President Petro of anti-Semitism. Protests at US campuses have reached boiling point after police moved in to remove the weeks-long sit-in at Columbia University. Along with sites around the country, hundreds of demonstrators have been arrested in the past 24 hours. Demonstration at UCLA in California, meanwhile, descended into chaos when pro-Israeli protesters attacked a pro-Palestinian encampment. Our West Coast correspondent Wasim Korne has more details.
The Chancellor of the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA, has called this one of the darkest days in the campus's history. Just a few moments ago, we had students and faculty members all gathering together just at the quad, the site of last night's violence, to read out a letter saying it was unacceptable for students to be targeted for protesting peacefully. The president of the University of California Network said he was going to be ordering an independent review, not only into the university's planning for these types of situations, but also into the police response, because that is one of the biggest questions, if not the biggest question, that remains at this hour. Why did it take police more than 3 hours to intervene and another hour and a half before they decided to clear the battleground area? The Los Angeles Times is reporting now that it took a while, for several hours in fact, for the UCLA police and also LAPD to agree on some sort of intervention, what kind of size of intervention, whether police would be wearing riot gear, and that is why there was such a delayed response. In the meantime, pro-Palestinian students for the most part were getting injured. 15 people were injured. One of them was taken to hospital for a head injury. As for the camp itself, you might be able to see behind me, they're setting up more barricades to prepare for any possibility tonight.
Moving on now to other world news, and Florida's ban on most abortions after 6 weeks of pregnancy came into effect on Wednesday. Marking the occasion, the Vice President, Kamala Harris, visited Jacksonville, where she said the measure is a direct result of Donald Trump's appointment to the Supreme Court, Conservative members overturning Roe v. Wade, which had enshrined a woman's right to abortion in the Constitution, and now allowing individual states to set their own policies.
Starting this morning, women in Florida became subject to an abortion ban so extreme it applies before many women even know they are pregnant. Which, by the way, tells us the extremists who wrote this ban either don't know how a woman's body works, or they simply don't care.
The state of Arizona has meanwhile voted to undo a near-total abortion ban based on a law reintroduced from 160 years ago. 2 Republicans joined with Democrats in the state Senate on the 16-14 vote in favor of repealing a Civil War-era ban, and the Democratic governor, Katie Hobbs, has said she will quickly be signing that. Abortion rights are expected to play a key role in this year's presidential election, with Arizona one of the key battleground states. Over now to the former Soviet Republic of Georgia, where lawmakers have moved a step closer to passing what's being dubbed the Russian law by its critics. It would require an organisation that receives 20% of funding from overseas to register as foreign agents, with similar legislation used by Moscow to crack down on dissent. The bill cleared its second reading in Parliament as tens of thousands of people took to the streets to protest against it. Lauren Berstecker reports.
They came out in droves again to protest against the so-called Russian law. Undeterred by a growing security crackdown, tens of thousands of people crowded the streets of Tbilisi on Wednesday to fight for their ideals.
It's what we are afraid of more: being gassed, being beaten up, or losing the country.
Critics, including Georgia's president Salome Zurabishvili, say the foreign influence bill is a carbon copy of a similar law in Russia and will be used to stifle media freedom.
It's a duplicate of what President Putin has been doing in Russia over the past years in order to suppress the civil society, the non-governmental organizations.
Opponents of the law also worry it could jeopardize Georgia's bid for European membership.
It's a geopolitical shift by Georgian dream to drag back Georgia into Russian influence and to close the European future. But the thing is that the majority of this country wants the opposite.
Lawmakers approved the bill in its second reading on Wednesday during a heated parliamentary session. Opposition MP Levan Khabeishvili also took the stand to showcase his wounds after he was beaten by police during the protests.
Look, these are the marks of Russia. Unfortunately, many young people woke up with the same marks today.
Last year, a similar draft law was dropped by the ruling party following widespread popular protests.
Those are all our top stories this hour. Do stay tuned for more world news coming up on France 24.
This is Asia Now.
A very good morning. It is 11 a.m. in Singapore and Hong Kong, 8:30 in New Delhi and 10 o'clock in Jakarta. I'm Shahida Osman. At this hour, a surge of protests pushing American universities on edge. Police arrest more than 300 demonstrators after pro-Palestinian and pro-Israel demonstrators clash. Officers are stationed on campus as safety concerns mount. U.S. top diplomat Antony Blinken ramps up the pressure on Hamas to accept the latest ceasefire deal, despite Israel warning that the army will proceed to invade Rafah with or without an agreement. And the death toll from a highway collapse in southern China rises to 36. Local reports say the deadly incident was a natural geological disaster caused by persistent heavy rain in recent weeks. Universities across the United States are on alert after police intervention was required at several campuses to disrupt clashes and building sieges. Now, this is amid protests over the Gaza war. There are mounting concerns that schools may turn into hotbeds for instigation by outsiders. Police action was seen on both East and West coasts.
This is the New York City Police Department. You have been warned as per Fordham University. Police campus.
A surgical intervention by the NYPD, clearing protesters from Fordham University. At least 15 who refused were arrested. Over in California, clashes erupted in UCLA as rival pro-Palestinian and pro-Israel camps attacked each other. From tearing down makeshift barricades to throwing objects and engaging in fistfights, it went on for a couple of hours until police stepped in. Armed with helmets and face shields, they separated the protesters to stop the violence that left at least 15 people hurt. The calm has returned, at least for now. Classes are cancelled, and independent review has been ordered, but concerns linger. Protesters are staying put and reinforcing their camp. Across the country, the majority of demonstrators are demanding universities cut investments linked to Israel and the Gaza war. Now it seems the majority are also outsiders.
I was also just extremely frustrated, the fact that my school is doing absolutely nothing, while these people who are not students, and these are not UCLA students, so the vast majority of them are coming here and attacking UCLA students on UCLA's campgrounds.
The same claim of outside interference is being made by New York City's mayor. It follows the arrest of nearly 300 people at Columbia University and City College. The mayor said professional outside agitators were involved in stoking the protests.
Globally, there is a movement to radicalize young people, and I'm not going to wait until it's done and all of a sudden acknowledge the existence of it. This is a global problem, that young people are being influenced by those who are professionals at radicalizing our children, and I'm not going to allow that to happen as the mayor of the city of New York.
Meantime, the White House defended President Joe Biden. He's facing criticism for saying little as protests spread across the country. His last public comments on the issue was more than a week ago.
The president is being kept regularly updated on what's happening, as you just stated, across the country. He is monitoring the situation closely, so is his team. And I would just add that no president has spoken more forcefully about combating anti-Semitism than this president.
Mr. Biden may have to step it up. His presumed rival for the presidential election, Donald Trump, is seizing the moment.
To every college president, I say remove the encampments immediately, vanquish the radicals, and take back our campuses for all of the normal students who want a safe place from which to learn.
At stake are votes by youths, and polls suggest support for Joe Biden among them is falling.
And Kate Fisher tells us whether more information is emerging about outsiders being involved in the protests and if federal authorities are taking any action.
Some universities and police officers have suggested that not all of these protesters were actually students or members of the universities where they were doing their demonstrations. In fact, the University of Texas at Austin has said that 45 of those people arrested out of 79 were not, in fact, associated with the university. And Columbia is now, after the arrest there in New York, they are now looking at all the names and double-checking on their database to see whether they are all students or associates of the university. So it's certainly an issue. In terms of whether there will be any federal response, Karine Jean-Pierre, the White House press secretary, was asked about that today, and she said that certainly the Department of Justice, Homeland Security and Education will be looking at all of this, which does suggest perhaps there could be some federal involvement as well if it is found that there are people that weren't connected with the university but were still taking part in these protests and in some cases turning to violence.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has categorized the U.S. campus protests as anti-Semitic. He previously argued the response of several university presidents was shameful and more needed to be done. He held a meeting with the head of Yeshiva University, an institution which calls itself the world's flagship Jewish university and has 4 campuses in New York. Mr. Netanyahu also welcomed an initiative to take U.S. university presidents on a so-called education program in Poland. U.S. top diplomat Antony Blinken is pushing Hamas to accept a ceasefire deal. Now this, despite Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu vowing to launch an assault on Rafah with or without an agreement. That southern town is the final stronghold of Hamas.
It's on Hamas. Hamas has to decide whether it will take this deal and actually advance the situation for the people that it purports to care about in Gaza. There is no time for delay. There's no time for further haggling. The deal is there. They should take it.
Talks on a potential truce and hostage release deal to pause war have been held in Cairo, involving U.S., Egyptian and Qatari mediators. Hamas says it will respond to the proposed plan soon. The UN has warned that an offensive on Rafah would be an unbearable escalation. Some 1.5 million Palestinians have fled there as Israeli bombardments ravaged northern Gaza.
Our position is clear. It hasn't changed. It won't change. We will not support a major military operation in Rafah absent an effective plan to make sure that civilians are not harmed. And no, we've not seen such a plan.
And Sarah Coates with more on how realistic the hope for a fresh truce is.
This is why we are seeing just such an intensive diplomatic effort happening here on the ground right now, because really the bottom line is if a deal isn't done, then Rafah will happen. And this is certainly something that the international community does not want to see. Israel is of the belief that the last remaining 4 Hamas battalions are down in that southern Gazan area of Rafah. It also believes this is potentially where some of the senior Hamas commanders are hiding, like Yahya Sinwar. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he's under a lot of pressure, of course, from the far right-wing flank of his government, specifically Itamar Ben-Gvir, the National Security Minister, and also the Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich. They've been threatening to walk away from from the government if a deal is made with Hamas, and also if the IDF doesn't actually go down into Rafah. Now, on the other side, you've got people here right around the country in Israel who are demanding the Prime Minister step down, saying that a deal needs to be done now to bring these captives home, and that is far more important than any military operation. And just fairly briefly, a new poll was actually released here in Israel. It shows that half of the public believe that Netanyahu should resign immediately, including 28% of those who voted for him, saying that if elections were to be held today, then the War Cabinet member and the former Defense Minister Benny Gantz would win.
For civilians in Gaza, the need for a ceasefire could not be more urgent as famine looms. Bread has been key to keeping hunger at bay in the enclave, and Gaza's remaining bakeries have been slowly reopening their doors as humanitarian aid trickles back in.
I'm a woman on my own with young girls to feed, says Asma al-Balbasi. This is how desperate she and other Gazans are for bread. She walks daily through the dangerous landscape of North Gaza, reduced to rubble by Israeli strikes, and where sporadic fighting breaks out between Israeli forces and Hamas militants. Aid agencies say famine still looms here, though some bakeries have reopened and supplies are improving. It's an hour to the bakery and an hour home, she says.
انا ست لحالي والله بقدرش انه مثلا الوالد اختيار كبير في السن بقدرش يجي كل يوم والتاني يمشي هذا المسافه الطويله كلها علشان يشتري ربطه خبز. عندي بنات صغار انا لازم اطعميهم. الوضع صعب. ما ينفعش اضلني يعني لما استنى حدا يجي يجيب لهم اللقمه.
Restoring Gaza's bakeries and ensuring a regular supply of flour, water and fuel will be crucial to stopping famine. The first bakery reopened mid-April using flour and fuel provided by the World Food Programme. Hundreds of people stood in line among the ruins, and the bakers had to employ stewards to maintain order. Out of 5 run by Camel Ajur bakeries, it's the only one back up and running. Though the need is so high, they're running a 24-hour operation, says the bakery's administrator Karam Ajur.
هو شعور انسان اكثر ما يكون شعور شخصي، لانه انا من الناس وبشوف يعني شعور الناس وحاجتهم كانت الاكل كيف كانت والطعام. المده كانت طويله كثير يعني قد ما يحكي واحد عدد الايام اللي تسكر فيها المخبز وحاجه الناس للطعام والاكل والشرب مش حتكون زي ما الانسان بيعيش هذه الايام. فكثير كان شعور انه يا ريت يكون في مخابز ثانيه اللي تشتغل وتساعد الناس اكثر واكثر، ويا ريت كانت المده كمان كانت اقل من هيك، ولكن هذا اللي صار.
Balbasi says she waits at least 20 minutes each day for 2 bags of flatbread, a staple for Gazans, which she needs for her children and other relatives.
والله العظيم بروح بسرعه خفيفه برجع بالوزن هذا. انا عندي اعصاب حتى ايدي بتعبن يعني بصير يرجف في كهرباء بايدي. بس ايش بدنا نعمل؟ فيش مواصلات، فيش حدا يشيل معك يعني. ابوي اختيار كبير واخوي بيروح بيشوف رزقه. احيانا بروح ماما احيانا بروح انا عشان اطفالي صغار. الحمد لله. كيف حالك يا ماما؟
Back at home, the girls are waiting anxiously for her safe return and to eat. Pockets of famine are emerging in Gaza and children have died from malnutrition and dehydration. Even Israel's closest allies have increased pressure on it to do more to let in food.
والله قبل الحرب كنا ناكل كل شيء الحمد لله. كان كل شيء متوفر. الطحين الابيض متوفر. كنا نستلمه من المؤن ببلاش، ما كناش نضطر نشتريه. كنا الحمد لله دجاج صدر كل شيء. كنا نجيب كفته، كنا نجيب التونه اللي الايام هذه ما بقدرش واحد يشتريها. كنا نلاقيها يعني بنص الثمن نشتريها. علب اللحمه كل شيء الايام هذه. احنا قبل كنا ناكل كل شيء. الرز كان متوفر بشكل مش طبيعي. الايام هذه صرنا مش لاقيينه.
Israel has blockaded Gaza for months, but aid has started to flow in higher volumes into northern Gaza since it opened a new crossing point. Aid agencies warn it is still nowhere near enough, and the WFP said last week northern Gaza is still heading towards famine.
And our Asia Business Update is next with Sarah Alcaldi. US and Singapore celebrating 2 decades of a free trade agreement. What's next, Sarah?
Well, Sean, the success of the FTA has spurred both countries to look at ways of expanding their business links a notch higher into new areas such as AI and green energy. Plus, Singapore's largest bank, DBS, posts record first quarter earnings driven by the higher for longer interest rate environment.
Amid its worst cost of living crisis in nearly 3 decades, Nigeria announces up to 35% pay hike for government workers.
François Bozizé, the Central African Republic's former president, is wanted for crimes allegedly committed under his tenure. He went back to court in the Central African Republic. CIR issued an international arrest warrant Tuesday for the country's exiled former president, François Bozizé. The warrant covers crimes from 2009 to 2013 by the Presidential Guard and other security forces, a spokesperson for the Special Criminal Court said. Bozizé currently lives in Guinea-Bissau. The country's president, Umaru Sissoko Embalo, told the Associated Press news agency that he had not received any request from Bangui about the arrest warrant and that his country's laws do not allow for extradition. The CIR's Special Criminal Court is tasked with trying war crimes and other human rights abuses committed during the coups and violence that the country has experienced since 2003. According to a 2021 report by Amnesty International, dozens suspected of criminal responsibility for war crimes remain at large despite warrants issued by the court. Bozizé seized power in 2003 and was ousted by rebels a decade later. That led to a civil war marked by sectarian violence, atrocities, and the exploitation of children as soldiers.
In commemoration of May Day, the Nigerian government has announced the approval of a 25% and 35% salary increase for some category of workers in the country. A statement signed Tuesday by the National Salaries, Incomes and Wages Commission said the increases included government workers in the education, health and security sectors. The lowest paid government employee will earn at least $325 a year, according to the statement. Nigeria's labor unions have been agitating for an increase in wages and salaries since last year when President Bola Ahmed Tinubu effected the removal of subsidies on petrol upon his assumption of office. Since then, inflation in Africa's most populous nation has skyrocketed, reaching nearly 35% in March, the highest in 28 years, and the value of the naira, the country's currency, has also plummeted against the dollar, losing 60%. The Nigerian government is separately negotiating with labor unions on a new national monthly minimum wage, which was last reviewed in 2019.
The President of Kenya, William Ruto, visited Tuesday flood-hit Kamuchiri village north of Nairobi, with seasonal rains forecast to increase. The cabinet said residents of areas with flooding or landslides in the past and residents near dams and rivers considered at high risk will have to evacuate within 48 hours from Wednesday. Everyone living on the riparian zones should vacate in Nairobi and all over the country because we do not want to keep losing the lives of our citizens. We will put in place adequate plans to feed them, shelter them, and provide all the necessary requirements. We decided this in cabinet today, and the government will work with development partners on this undertaking. The president addressed survivors of the Kamuchiri village, where a river broke through a blocked tunnel early Monday and killed at least 48 people. Residents expressed their pain, some vented their frustration at the government's response. I know you have lost your children. Up to now, 48 bodies of children, women and men have been retrieved from here. Even though most of the about 100 people that were in hospitals have been treated and discharged, we still have about 26 people admitted. Heavy rains since mid-March have displaced more than 1,100 people across the country and damaged roads and other infrastructure. Kenya's cabinet said those who don't follow the evacuation order will be moved by force.
Zimbabwe on Tuesday began circulating a new currency to replace one that's been battered by depreciation and often outright rejection by the people. The ZIG, short for Zimbabwe Gold, was introduced electronically in early April, but people are now able to use banknotes and coins. Now I'll easily get change, and I will not be forced to buy things I don't need. We used to buy with US dollars only, and will be forced to get salt and matches as change. This is Harari's latest attempt to halt a long-running currency crisis, underlining its persistent economic troubles. Zimbabwe has not recovered from the 2009 economic and financial collapse. I'm scared that some people will con me because I don't understand its value. We need someone who can teach us. Authorities say they have faith in the ZIG because it's backed by the country's gold reserves, but experts say that with a weak manufacturing base, the currency will struggle like the others.
So it's really up to government to be able to sustain itself and to be able to be disciplined, that they will stay away from the printing press, and then people will slowly and gradually begin to accept the local currency, and then there will not be any need for any alternative market.
As people queued Tuesday to get their hands on the new currency, many remain skeptical after 2 decades of economic turmoil.
Good evening, I'm Amna Nawaz.
And I'm Jeff Bennett. On the News Hour tonight, police clear an occupied building at Columbia University and violence erupts at UCLA. Jeff Bennett. On the News Hour tonight, police clear an occupied building at Columbia University and violence erupts at UCLA as campus protests over the war in Gaza intensify.
New details in former President Trump's own words about what he would do with a second term in the White House.
And in a rare interview, the top U.S. commander in the Indo-Pacific region discusses efforts to counter China.
They continue to be more aggressive in a variety of areas. They're challenging the current international rules who benefit an authoritarian society.
And by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the News Hour. There were arrests again today at a number of college campuses after protests led to heated confrontations between demonstrators and law enforcement.
The decision by college officials to call in police and when to do so has been debated in a number of states. Arrests played out dramatically on television overnight in both New York and Los Angeles, but they are by no means the only ones, and many don't involve students.
Demonstrations at UCLA took a turn overnight as clashes erupted at an encampment of pro-Palestinian protesters when counter-protesters began dismantling plywood barriers around the camp.
Oh, somebody just got ambushed.
Demonstrators kicked, shoved, and hit one another. Fireworks and pepper spray were deployed, it's unclear by whom. Police were eventually able to separate the two groups. By morning, a calmer scene, but all classes were canceled for the day and many students were left frustrated.
Things are not going well, you know. People are angry at each other. Lots of tensions going on. I just hope things can get resolved. Maybe some negotiations going on. Who knows what will happen, but I just hope things get resolved right away.
Across the country in New York, demonstrations also flared overnight as police removed pro-Palestinian protesters who'd occupied a Columbia University building for more than 12 hours. In a statement today, Columbia president of Tulane University, 7 others were suspended, as protests from coast to coast continue to sustain and, in some cases, grow.
For a closer look now at when and how police are involved in these protests, I'm joined by Frederick Lawrence, a distinguished lecturer at Georgetown University's Law Center, and he previously served as president of Brandeis University, and by Ed Davis. He's former commissioner of the Boston Police Department from 2006 to 2013. He's now president and CEO of the Edward Davis Company, that's a business strategy and security services firm. Welcome to you both. And Fred, I'll begin with you as a former university president. What's your reaction to how you're seeing when and how university officials are
we'll see what happens. We've got to get through graduation in the summertime when there aren't as many people on campus. The focus of these protests may move somewhere, but a lot depends on what happens in Gaza.
That is Ed Davis, former commissioner of the Boston Police Department, and Frederick Lawrence from Georgetown University Law Center, former president of Brandeis University. Thank you, gentlemen, to you both. We appreciate your time.
Good being with you. Amid the campus unrest in the U.S., Secretary of State Antony Blinken spent this day in Israel, insisting the time is now for a ceasefire. He spoke with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Jerusalem and visited an aid crossing into Gaza. Later, he said Israel has offered key compromises for a ceasefire, and he pressed Hamas to say yes.
If Hamas actually purports to care about the Palestinian people and wants to see an immediate alleviation of their suffering, it will take the deal. If it doesn't, I think that's further proof that it doesn't care a bit.
In turn, the Prime Minister's office insisted that Israel still means to assault the city of Rafah to finish off Hamas. But Blinken said the U.S. has not received any Israeli plan for attacking Rafah in southern Gaza that accounts for the safety of civilians. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians are sheltering in Rafah amid airstrikes that killed 2 more children overnight, and despite fears of an Israeli ground offensive.
We are afraid at any moment that there will be an invasion of Rafah. And even if the invasion happens, we do not know where to go. There is no safe place left. God willing, there will be a truce.
Palestinian officials say the war in Gaza has killed more than 34,500 people to date, and Hamas terrorists killed some 1,200 people in the October raid into southern Israel that sparked the war. In the day's other headlines, the Federal Reserve left its key interest rate unchanged at better than 5%, acknowledging that inflation remains stubbornly high. That, in turn, jeopardizes plans to cut rates 3 times this year. Fed Chair Jerome Powell said he still expects inflation to drop this year closer to the goal of 2%, but there's no sign yet of that.
We didn't see progress in the first quarter, and I've said that it appears then that it's going to take longer for us to reach that point of confidence. So I don't know how long it'll take. I can just say that when we get that confidence, then rate cuts will be in scope, and I don't know exactly when that will be.
Powell did say it's unlikely the Fed's next move will be a rate increase. There have been major developments on abortion policy on 2 fronts today. In Florida, a ban on abortion after 6 weeks of pregnancy took effect, with exceptions for rape, incest, and the life of the mother. And Vice President Kamala Harris visited Jacksonville today and denounced the law. Voters will decide whether to add abortion rights to the state constitution this November. The Arizona State Senate voted today to overturn a strict abortion ban that dates to 1864. Democrats won over enough Republicans to carry the measure. A repeal had narrowly passed the state House last week as 3 Republicans crossed party lines. The law provides no exceptions for rape or incest. In Congress, far-right Republican Marjorie Taylor Greene is vowing that she'll forge ahead with trying to oust House Speaker Mike Johnson. Many Republicans still support Johnson, and Democrats now say that they'll oppose efforts to remove him. But today, outside the Capitol, Greene announced that she'll call for a vote next week unless Johnson quits.
He can pray about it, think about it all weekend, do the right thing, and resign, giving our conference time to elect a new leader, a new Speaker of the House. He should reject the endorsement of Hakeem Jeffries and the entire Democrat leadership team. That is not an endorsement that any Republican speaker should ever want or embrace.
For his part, House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries says it's time for Democrats to help restore order in the House.
House Republicans are either unwilling or unable to get Marjorie Taylor Greene and the extreme MAGA Republicans under control, and so it's going to take a bipartisan coalition and partnership to accomplish that objective.
House Speaker Johnson enraged his Republican critics last month when he used Democratic support to push through aid for Ukraine. United Methodist Church delegates have repealed a long-standing ban on LGBTQ clergy. The vote came today at the denomination's national gathering in Charlotte, North Carolina. Delegates also barred regional leaders from punishing clergy who officiate same-sex weddings. All of this comes as many conservatives have left the church in recent years. Protesters around the world poured into the streets to advocate labor rights on this May Day. Rallies popped up from Sri Lanka, a country struggling through economic crisis, to Paris, where workers demanded wage hikes ahead of the Summer Olympic Games. In Istanbul, Turkey, police arrested more than 200 people after clashes broke out near the city's main square. In Kansas, a town of just 700 people is in mourning tonight after a tornado killed 1 person and blasted homes into ruins. Last night's storm ripped through Westmoreland, about 50 miles outside of Topeka. Piles of tree limbs and other debris cluttered neighborhood streets. Officials said 22 homes were destroyed, with more than a dozen others damaged. Former students at a now-defunct chain of colleges will have $6 billion of federal student loan canceled over allegations of fraud. The Biden administration says it's writing off loan debt to some 317,000 people who attended the art institutes. Federal officials say the schools lied about their job prospects. And on Wall Street, stocks search for direction after the Fed's announcement on inflation and interest rates. The Dow Jones Industrial Average gained 87 points to close at 37,903. The Nasdaq fell 52 points. The S&P 500 slipped 17. Still to come on the NewsHour, a government task force releases new breast cancer screening guidelines. And an agriculture university in Rwanda works to develop a climate-aware approach to help farmers.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
Donald Trump was out of the courtroom and back on the campaign trail today in Wisconsin with a familiar refrain about undocumented immigrants.
We're going to have the largest deportation in the history of our country. We have no choice.
It was the latest example of the policies he would like to implement if reelected, and it follows a wide-ranging interview with Time magazine that sparked headlines about what he would do in a second term. Lisa Desjardins joins us now. So Lisa, there's a lot in this interview, but let's start with how Donald Trump would staff his administration and what sounds like a litmus test about the...
We're out there to believe he would strengthen it.
All right, Lisa Desjardins, thanks so much for walking us through all this. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
A key scientific panel has updated its recommendations on breast cancer screenings. Allie Rogan has more on the changes that could potentially save thousands of lives. Allie?
The U.S. Preventive Services Task Force is now recommending that all women start getting biennial mammograms at age 40 until they turn 75. The new guidelines replace ones from 2016. Wilson, chair of the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
The Biden administration calls the People's Republic of China, or PRC, the only country with the will, the intent, and the military strength to change the world order. The U.S. military officer responsible for China and the vast area from Hawaii to India is stepping down this week after 3 years and a 40-year career. He spoke in his final interview with Nick Schifrin in Honolulu.
The military calls it Indo-Pacific Command, or Indo-PACOM. It covers half the surface area of the planet and more than 60% of the world's economy and population. And increasingly, Admiral John Aquilino sees China speeding up.
Side the 380,000 U.S. service members in this region.
Admiral Aquilino, thank you very much.
Thanks, Nick.
The African continent faces challenges as varied as its vast landmass, some 3 times the size of the United States. But one shared challenge by all 54 countries is food security. How to feed a population of 1.2 billion people that's expected to double by 2050. Fred DeSam Lazaro has a report on one attempt to build a foundation. It's part of his series, Agents for Change.
This picturesque 3,000-acre campus represents a $100 million effort to bring a piece of Nebraska to Rwanda, a land whose history and geography could not be more distant from the American Midwest. On one small plot, a harvest of corn or maize is being brought in by students whose day is split between farm chores and a rigorous curriculum of chemistry, biology, and mathematics. The Rwanda Institute for Conservation Agriculture, or RICA, was inaugurated in 2019, aiming to...
Fred's reporting is a partnership with the Undertold Stories Project at the University of St. Thomas in Minnesota.
And remember, there's more online, including a look at a little-known illness linked to frequent cannabis use. That's at pbs.org/newshour.
And join us again here tomorrow night when we'll have a look at the critical youth vote in the battleground state of Michigan. And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Amna Navaz.
And I'm Jeff Bennett. For all of us here at the PBS NewsHour, thanks for joining us.
I'm on the air here in New York. The aerials coming in right now from Fordham University. The protests, the NYPD now on the scene in riot gear. And new video tonight as the NYPD enters that hall at Columbia University to take it back. From Fordham University, the protests, the NYPD now on the scene in riot gear. And new video tonight as the NYPD enters that hall at Columbia University to take it back. Tonight, those aerials coming in, the unfolding scene at Fordham. Across the country tonight, protesters by the hundreds arrested. New York City police clearing pro-Palestinian demonstrators, and they say outside agitators too, off the Columbia campus. Officers climbing through a window to remove protesters occupying Hamilton Hall, going room to room. Violent clashes breaking out among protest groups at UCLA and officers clashing with demonstrators at the University of Wisconsin. Also tonight, Hamas could answer at any moment whether this high-stakes ceasefire and hostage deal between Israel and Hamas will in fact move forward. Secretary of State Antony Blinken in the region right now. Will there be a ceasefire? We have late reporting.
In the U.S., reports of an active shooter outside a middle school, reports of a 14-year-old possibly armed with a rifle, the school locked down. Tonight, what police are now saying about that teen. We're tracking the new tornado threat and severe storms at this hour across multiple states. Ginger Z is here tonight. This evening, Florida's 6-week abortion ban now in effect starting today. Donald Trump tonight defending states taking action on abortion. Vice President Kamala Harris in Florida tonight, saying she and the president believe these decisions should be made by women, not the government. Harvey Weinstein back in court for the first time since his rape conviction was overturned in New York. Will there be a new trial? What was revealed today? The Robin Roberts exclusive here tonight with WNBA star Brittany Griner. Her first interview about her 10 months behind bars in Russia. What she revealed to Robin. Tonight, the investigation into voters partying and then seen dumping trash into the Atlantic, right off the coast of Florida. What authorities are now saying about this. The passenger plane, the possible bird strike, and the emergency landing tonight, and reports of an earthquake in California.
From ABC News World Headquarters in New York, this is World News Tonight with David Muir.
Good evening. We begin tonight here with the breaking news. The images coming in right now among these crackdowns on campus protests. The NYPD now at the scene in riot gear at Fordham University as we come on tonight. We also have new images of the NYPD at Columbia University going into that hall through a second-floor window to move those protesters who smashed their way in out. Those aerials tonight just coming in. This is Fordham University. NYPD officers in tactical gear confronting protesters. As we come on, we've just been told that Fordham has officially asked the NYPD to help. Now, this comes after those images last night as we were on the air in the West. Scores of officers marching on Columbia's campus, some in riot gear using a ramp to enter Hamilton Hall through a second-story window. They say pro-Palestinian protesters, and they say some outside agitators were inside that hall. Chairs used as barricades, offices damaged, protesters' plans written on a classroom chalkboard. More than 100 people taken into custody at Columbia alone. Tonight, that tent encampment at Columbia, now gone. The NYPD has been asked to stay until May 17th there so that students can have their graduation. But again, tonight, the scene now unfolding at Fordham, the school asking the NYPD to help. ABC's Stephanie Ramos leading us off again tonight.
If you refuse to leave, you may be placed under arrest.
Tonight, just hours after student protesters set up an encampment in a campus building, Fordham University calling in the NYPD to disperse the crowd. Warning, lawlessness will not be tolerated. Officers moving in and making arrests. It comes as the NYPD releases new video inside the raid at Columbia University overnight. Officers in riot gear marching up that ramp to get into the second story of Hamilton Hall, then moving floor by floor in a massive show of force. Breaking open locked rooms with hammers, cutting their way through locked metal doors. Police taking more than 100 protesters into custody. At nearby City College,
This is the New York City Police Department.
officers there moving in to break down tents and making arrests. Nearly 300 in all facing charges ranging from trespassing to criminal mischief to burglary. The NYPD taking down the Palestinian flag and putting the American flag back up. Today, the mayor defending the crackdown and blaming outside agitators for training and leading students who broke in and seized that building.
There is a movement to radicalize young people, and I'm not going to wait until it's done and all of a sudden acknowledge the existence of it.
So far, neither police nor prosecutors are saying how many of those arrested were from outside the school. The White House today pressed on whether the president supported deploying the NYPD into schools.
They have the right to peacefully protest. Forcibly taking over a building is not peaceful. It's just not.
Tonight, with Columbia's lawn now cleared of tents for the first time in 2 weeks, pro-Palestinian protesters and professors slamming school administrators and the police response.
This is the conscience of a nation speaking through your kids, through young people who are risking their futures, who are risking suspension, expulsion, criminal arrest.
Overnight, a disturbing turn at UCLA with an all-out brawl after counter-protesters tried to break down a pro-Palestinian encampment. Fistfights erupting, people hitting each other with wood and long sticks. This is the moment someone threw a firework into the protest encampment. The violence unfolding for more than 2 hours before police in riot gear moved in. Governor Gavin Newsom saying the delayed response by law enforcement was unacceptable and demands answers. Tonight, as campus protests rage from Arizona to Wisconsin, there is mounting frustration on all sides.
Everyone's just yelling at each other, and there's no common ground.
And again, David, Fordham University calling on the NYPD to intervene and disperse the crowds. Drones flying overhead, police currently on the scene. Here at Columbia University, police are authorized to be on campus through May 17th. The graduation ceremony now moving forward. David.
Stephanie Ramos on this again tonight for us. Stephanie, thank you. Meantime, on this issue, we are told that Hamas could answer at any moment whether this high-stakes ceasefire and hostage deal between Israel and Hamas will move forward to get many of the remaining hostages out. Secretary of State Antony Blinken in the region saying, quote, "The time is now to accept the deal." Tom Sufi Burridge with late reporting coming in now from Tel Aviv.
Tonight, Hamas's response to that high-stakes, US-brokered ceasefire and hostage deal expected at any moment. Secretary of State Antony Blinken meeting face-to-face today with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, saying the time is now for Hamas to accept the offer.
There is no time for delay. There's no time for further haggling.
The initial phase of the Israeli offer includes a 6-week pause in the fighting and the release of Palestinian prisoners in exchange for 33 hostages, including the injured. 23-year-old American-Israeli Hersh Goldberg-Polin, seen here in this Hamas video, missing part of his left arm, blown off on October 7 by terrorists when he was captured. Blinken also meeting today with the family of 64-year-old American-Israeli hostage Keith Siegel. It's believed around 100 hostages are still being held in Gaza.
We will not rest until everyone, man, woman, soldier, civilian, young, old, is back home.
And tonight, the US doubling down, warning Israel not to invade Rafah in southern Gaza, where more than 1 million Palestinians are taking refuge, saying peace in the region is at stake. But Netanyahu defiant, vowing Tuesday Israeli forces will go into Rafah to root out the remaining Hamas battalions, with or without a deal. And David, we're just getting word. A Hamas leader says Hamas's position on the proposed ceasefire deal is negative, but they're still studying it, and negotiations could still continue. David?
Tom Sophie Burridge with late reporting from Tel Aviv. Tom, thank you. Meantime, back here in the U.S. tonight, reports of an active shooter outside a middle school. Police say a 14-year-old possibly armed with a rifle. That school put on lockdown for a time, and then authorities moving in on that teenager. ABC's Pierre Thomas with what we've learned so far in this Wisconsin case.
Tonight, the small community of Mount Horeb, Wisconsin, shaken after reports of an active shooter headed toward a middle school.
Reports of shots fired at the school.
Children and staff fleeing. The school put on lockdown. Sources telling ABC News shortly after noon, police encountered a 14-year-old with what appeared to be a rifle. Police racing to the scene. The gunman did not breach the school, but police say he was neutralized in a confrontation with officers.
So there is one injury. It's going to be the suspect.
Images all too familiar. Today, nervous parents waiting. SWAT teams, emergency vehicles, and a dead body.
This has been a shock. I mean, so scary. It's devastating to hear what's going on, you know. I'm texting my son right now. He was barricaded in the classroom. They stopped that, but there's still lockdowns. I don't want no kid to go through what's going on, nor parents go through this.
Parents and police understandably shaken. The fear real, as mass shootings have become routine in this country, even at schools. No one forgetting Uvalde, and many others like Parkland and Newtown. Police have not released any information on the suspect, who sources say is a juvenile. David, that town is traumatized tonight, but grateful no one else was injured.
We are too. Pierre Thomas tonight. Pierre, thank you. We are tracking the potential for more tornadoes tonight. Severe storms on the move. Let's get right to Chief Meteorologist Ginger Z tracking it all again for us tonight. Ginger?
David, at least one tornado already ripping across the panhandle of Texas tonight, and it's going to be a long couple of hours, even into the overnight. So let me go ahead and show you. The tornado watch right now includes Dodge City, Kansas down to Lubbock, but the severe thunderstorm watch for damaging winds goes to the Mexican border. Waco, Austin, San Antonio, Houston, and Alexandria, Louisiana could see a widespread 3 to 5 inches and up to 9 inches locally. You will see flash flood problems with that. These go late into the night. You can see the clock stops at 11 there, and then they'll keep chugging east. Tomorrow, we destabilize the atmosphere again and give that same area, including Abilene, a risk of damaging wind. But David, as remarkable as April was, second most tornadoes we've seen since records began in 1950 for the month, May is the one to watch. Climatologically, that's where we see the most tornadoes.
Yeah, May is often much worse. Ginger Z with us tonight. Ginger, thank you. Now to Florida tonight, where this evening that state's 6-week abortion ban has taken effect. Tonight, Donald Trump defending states that have taken their own action on abortion rights. Vice President Kamala Harris in Florida saying she and President Biden believe these decisions should be made by women and not the government. Here's Rachel Scott.
After spending Tuesday stuck in a Manhattan courtroom, tonight Donald Trump parachuting into key battlegrounds Wisconsin and Michigan before he has to fly right back to New York, where his criminal trial resumes tomorrow. In Waukesha today, Trump veering off teleprompter to defend himself on an issue that could decide the election: abortion.
Basically, the states decide on abortion, and people are absolutely thrilled with the way that's going on.
Just this week, Trump telling Time magazine he won't object if states monitor pregnant women to make sure they comply with abortion bans and prosecute women who violate them. Today, he doubled down.
Now I say it's up to the state. They'll ask me a question about it. I say that's up to the state. So I say to you, I think we did a very good job in that. A lot of people are very happy with it.
Today, Vice President Kamala Harris firing back in Florida, where the state's new abortion law just went into effect, banning abortion at 6 weeks before most women even know they are pregnant.
Basically, under Donald Trump, it would be fair game for women to be monitored and punished by the government. Whereas Joe Biden and I have a different view. We believe the government should never come between a woman and her doctor.
Florida's near total ban means abortion access is now largely cut off across the entire South.
As of this morning, 4 million women in this state woke up with fewer reproductive freedoms than they had last night. This is the new reality under a Trump abortion ban.
David, the Biden campaign is counting on abortion rights to galvanize voters this November. Both campaigns keenly aware that this issue could be on the ballot in as many as 13 states, including several key battlegrounds, and that abortion rights has won every single time it has appeared on the ballot. David.
Both campaigns know this, and you're right there live at a Trump event in Michigan tonight at this hour. Rachel, thank you. Tonight on the issue of abortion rights, the Arizona State Senate has also approved to repeal that Civil War-era abortion ban passed in 1864. 2 Republicans today voting with the Democrats 1 week after the Arizona House approved the repeal. Tonight, Arizona Governor Katie Hobbs says she will sign the repeal tomorrow into law, but the repeal won't take effect until sometime in the fall unless a court intervenes now. Tonight in New York, disgraced movie mogul Harvey Weinstein was back in court for the first time since an appeals court overturned his 2020 rape conviction. We learned today Weinstein is now set to be retried on sex assault charges sometime after Labor Day. He does remain in custody, his legal team also appealing a separate conviction in Los Angeles. We turn now to an ABC News exclusive tonight. Robin Roberts one-on-one with WNBA star Brittany Griner, speaking out for the first time about her 10 months behind bars in Russia and the mistake that changed her life. Tonight here, what she revealed to Robin.
At the Moscow airport, this is Russian Customs Service footage of Brittany Griner putting her carry-on bags through the scanner, unaware that life as she knows it is about to end, as the agent tells her to search her backpack.
So you reach down, because you've been told to go through your bag, and you felt
the cartridge. And I'm just like, oh my God, how did I make this mistake?
Did they ask you what was in it?
They asked, I looked at them, I was just like, I don't know. I was just like, CBD.
But it wasn't CBD. Russian authorities determined that between the two cartridges is actually 0.7 grams of cannabis oil containing THC, the psychoactive ingredient in marijuana.
Do you know there are those who say, come on, how did you not know that you had cartridges in your luggage? What do you say to the skeptics?
I would say, have you ever forgot your keys in your car? Left your car running? Have you ever, where's my glasses? They're on top of your head.
When did you realize that I'm being detained?
The moment they took my passport and they took my boarding pass.
134 days into her detainment, Brittany Griner goes on trial in Khimki, Russia.
I had no intent to break any Russian laws. I made an honest mistake, and I hope that in your ruling, that it doesn't end my life here.
You plead guilty?
Yes.
What was the thought process with that?
I understand what I did was a mistake and it was an accident, but at the same time, it happened.
She is sentenced to 9 years of hard labor.
Yes.
What were the conditions like there?
Really cold. It's a work camp. You go there to work. There's no rest.
Then in December 2022, Brittany finally gets the news. There will be a prisoner exchange.
You are told you're heading home, that it's happening.
I was thrilled. Like, I'm happy. I'm just like, oh my God, like, we'll win.
Our thanks to Robin and Brittany Griner for sitting down with us. Her new book is coming home, set to be published next Tuesday, and much more of Robin's exclusive interview, a special 2020 tonight, 10 p.m. Eastern, right here on ABC, and then streaming on Hulu. Our thanks to Robin again. One more note on the economy tonight. The Federal Reserve leaving interest rates unchanged, citing lack of progress in bringing inflation down to its 2% target. But Fed Chief Jerome Powell did ease some fears today, saying that any interest rate hike is unlikely. When we come back here tonight, we're getting word of a passenger plane reporting a possible bird strike, forced to make an emergency landing. There's also been an earthquake that hit Southern California, and those young boaters seen partying and then dumping trash right into the ocean off Florida. And what authorities are now saying tonight. Tonight, an American Eagle flight declaring an emergency following a possible bird strike during a flight from Washington, D.C. to Key West. The pilot reporting the strike while taking off from Reagan National Airport. 69 passengers on board, the flight diverting to Baltimore. No one was hurt. Tonight, there's word of a moderate earthquake hitting Southern California. The magnitude 4.1 quake centered near Corona in Riverside County, roughly 50 miles outside L.A. Felt more than 130 miles away. No reports of injuries or significant damage. When we come back here tonight, you'll see the boaters seen dumping trash right into the Atlantic off Florida. Authorities are on this tonight and what they're now saying. Tonight, the video sparking outrage appearing to show a group of young boaters dumping trash into the Atlantic off Boca Raton, Florida. Authorities have now identified the boaters allegedly throwing 2 garbage cans full of trash. You see it there. Expected to face multiple charges. When we come back here tonight, the tornado and one family's question, what happened to our dog Jack? In a moment. Finally tonight here, America Strong, an entire community looking for Jack. In Sulphur, Oklahoma, south of Oklahoma City tonight, the remarkable rescue after the tornadoes. Peyton McClure and her family searching for their dog, 2-year-old Jack, an Aussie Corgi mix. Peyton's grandparents' home was destroyed, the family survived, but Jack was lost. Neighbors and family searching through the rubble, and then the moment they see him, Jack is okay. Right here tonight.
Good evening, David. It's Peyton and Jack.
Peyton and Jack back together.
People were helping me find Jack that I didn't even know, so I'm just thankful to be a part of this community and thankful for everything that they've done.
We're so glad Jack's home. I'll see you tomorrow. Good night.
Thank you for making World News Tonight with David Muir, America's most watched newscast.
Now, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. New York police and riot gear raided the campuses of Columbia University and the City College of New York Tuesday night. The War and Peace Report, I'm Amy Goodman. New York police and riot gear raided the campuses of Columbia University and the City College of New York Tuesday night, arresting more than 200 student protesters in the latest crackdown on peaceful Palestine solidarity protests on U.S. campuses. Over the past 2 weeks, police in the United States have arrested more than 1,200 protesters on campuses as students set up encampments calling on schools to divest from Israel. The raid on Columbia came less than 24 hours after students occupied Hamilton Hall. It was 56 years to the day that police stormed the same hall during the historic 1968 protests at Columbia. On Tuesday night, police climbed into the barricaded building using a ladder attached to a police vehicle. During the police raid on the Columbia campus, the police also broke up the Gaza Solidarity Encampment, which had inspired similar encampments across the country. Columbia President Manu Shafiq asked the NYPD to, quote, retain a presence on campus through at least May 17th, 2024. That's 2 days after Columbia's graduation. On Tuesday, faculty at Barnard College, which is part of Columbia, overwhelmingly passed a vote of no confidence for President Laura Rosenberry. Meanwhile, in California, pro-Israeli counter-protesters armed with sticks and metal rods attacked a pro-Palestinian encampment on the campus of UCLA shortly after UCLA's chancellor ruled the encampment unlawful. Pro-Israel counter-protesters launched fireworks at the encampment, which they tried to tear down. In Richmond, Virginia, police deployed pepper spray against student protesters at Virginia Commonwealth University. At least 13 arrests were reported. In Louisiana, a police SWAT team raided an encampment at Tulane University earlier this morning, arresting at least 14 students. The raid came hours after the school suspended 5 students in the school's chapter of Students for a Democratic Society. In Missouri, a history professor was hospitalized Saturday after police violently threw him to the pavement. Steve Tamari, who teaches at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, was filming a protest at Washington University on his phone when he was attacked. His wife, Sandra Tamari, who is Palestinian-American, was arrested during the same protest. Meanwhile, at Brown University in Providence, Rhode Island, student protesters have voluntarily ended their encampment after school officials agreed to hold a vote on divesting from Israel. On Tuesday, the United Nations criticized the police crackdown on student protests. This is Marta Hurtado, spokesperson for the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights.
We are troubled by a series of heavy-handed steps taken to disperse and dismantle protests across university campuses in the United States of America. Freedom of expression and the right to peaceful assembly are fundamental to society, particularly when there is a sharp disagreement on major issues, as there are in relation to the conflict in the occupied Palestinian territory and Israel.
As negotiations continue over a ceasefire in Gaza, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has vowed to invade the southern city of Rafah with or without a ceasefire deal. In a statement, Netanyahu said, quote, the idea that we'll halt the war before achieving all of its goals is out of the question. Netanyahu's statement came hours before U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken arrived in Israel. On Tuesday, UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres called again for an immediate ceasefire and warned an Israeli invasion of Rafah would be a, quote, absolutely devastating tragedy.
For the sake of the people of Gaza, for the sake of the hostages and their families in Israel, and for the sake of the region and the wider world, I strongly encourage the government of Israel and the Hamas leadership to reach now an agreement. Without that, I fear the war, with all its consequences both in Gaza and across the region, will worsen exponentially.
The International Court of Justice has rejected a request by Nicaragua to order Germany to halt exporting arms to Israel, but the court declined to throw out the case. Nicaragua had accused Germany of violating the Genocide Convention by providing military and financial aid to Israel. In its ruling, the ICJ said, quote, the court considers it particularly important to remind all states of their international obligations relating to the transfer of arms to parties to an armed conflict in order to avoid the risk that such arms might be used to violate the above-mentioned conventions. An 18-year career diplomat has resigned from the State Department over the Biden administration's Gaza policy. Hala Rarit is the third State Department employee to publicly resign, joining Josh Paul and Anel Shilan. Rarit criticized the Biden administration's arming of Israel. She told the Washington Post, quote, we're promoting a generational cycle of revenge that's not making Israelis any safer, she said. Haiti's new ruling on elected transitional council has picked Fritz Belazer to be the country's new prime minister. His appointment surprised many in Haiti. Some members of the transitional council admit they don't even know who he is. Belazer had served as Haiti's sports minister from 2006 to 2011. Meanwhile, leaders of some of Haiti's most powerful armed groups are demanding a greater role in Haiti's transitional government. Over the weekend, Jimmy Cherizier, who is known as Barbecue, said, quote, it's either we are all at the table or the table gets destroyed with all of us, unquote. New York Judge Juan Merchan fined Donald Trump $9,000 on Tuesday for contempt of court for violating a gag order 9 times by publicly attacking witnesses and jurors in his hush-money criminal trial. Judge Merchan warned future violations could result in jail time for the former president. Later on Tuesday, Keith Davidson, the lawyer who represented Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal, testified during Trump's criminal trial about his dealings with Trump's attorney Michael Cohen. Prosecutors showed jurors the wire transfer authorization from Cohen, the form that Cohen used to send $130,000 to Davidson on October 27, 2016, to prevent Daniels from going public about her affair with Trump before the 2016 election. In other Trump news, the former president has refused to rule out political violence if he loses the election in November. Trump told Time magazine, quote, I think we're going to win. And if you don't win, and if we don't win, you know, it depends. It always depends on the fairness of an election, unquote. In the same interview, Trump said he would, quote, absolutely consider pardoning every person convicted for taking part in the January 6th insurrection at the U.S. Capitol. Florida's 6-week abortion ban goes into effect today, blocking access to the procedure before many people even know they're pregnant. Last month, Florida's Supreme Court ruled abortion rights are not constitutionally protected, allowing the near-total ban to be enforced. The measure has exceptions for rape, incest, fatal fetal anomalies, and medical emergencies. Reproductive justice advocates have vowed to keep fighting as Florida's High Court also ruled in favor of a November ballot referendum that, if passed, would enshrine abortion rights in Florida's Constitution. In a historic move, the Biden administration is moving to reclassify marijuana as a lower-risk substance. The Justice Department has recommended marijuana be reclassified to the same category as some prescription medication. For decades, it's been deemed a Category 1 substance, along with drugs like heroin. Rescheduling would ease restrictions on cannabis research and create legal protections for medical marijuana users who face housing and employment restrictions. DEA rescheduling would not result in federal legalization. The process for the drug reclassification could take months to complete. U.S. Rowing has announced it's rescinding honors for the late Olympic rowing coach Ted Nash after an independent investigation found compelling evidence of child sexual abuse. The probe was launched after former athlete Jennifer Fox revealed Nash began abusing her when she was 13 years old. In 2018, Jennifer Fox directed the film The Tale, a narrative memoir based in part on Nash's abuse. At the time, she did not mention Nash by name. Fox publicly accused him of abuse last year when she spoke to the New York Times and Democracy Now!
And I don't doubt that Ted did good in his sport. But the reality is this other story of the horror that he inflicted on me and possibly many, many others had never been told. And I think it's very important to bring this other story out to the world now and to show this other part of the man that people put on a pedestal and made into a god. It's a very important act to stand up to power in this way for me and for others.
Go to democracynow.org to see our full interview with Jennifer Fox. And workers around the world are marking May Day today. In Britain, hundreds blockaded the government's Department for Business and Trade to demand a ceasefire in Gaza and a halt of British arms sales to Israel. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York, joined...
The campaign to boycott Canada's largest grocer this Wednesday night. Why shoppers are urged to protest Loblaw as its profits soar.
The last thing you want is your loyal customers to sample the competition.
Will a boycott have any impact? Escalating conflict on campus.
You have been warned.
The push to remove protesters fighting to stand their ground. Busted where Canada's most wanted fugitive was caught. Meticulous search what Saskatoon police are looking for in this landfill. And new clues in a decades-old mystery on a Canadian movie set.
It seemed like it affected people in many, many different ways.
Who laced the chowder that left Titanic film workers stoned?
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. The cost of groceries and the profits of retailers are front and center again. Canada's largest food and drug retailer, Loblaw, is reporting a big jump in profits. Loblaw reported profit of more than $459 million in the first quarter of 2024, a jump of nearly 10% from a year ago. The retailer also raised its quarterly dividend for its shareholders by 15%. Its stock is up too, closing in on a record high in March. Loblaw says people are choosing to shop in greater numbers at their stores, and that's partly why profits are up. But some disgruntled customers are still pushing ahead with a boycott. And Gaviola has our top story tonight.
A call to boycott grocery behemoth Loblaws and all its different brands across the country, including Shoppers Drug Mart, Pharmaprix, Superstore, and No Frills.
Are you ready to take down Galen Weston Jr. and Loblaws?
The movement started online in a Reddit discussion among angry shoppers. It spiraled from there. In a statement to Global News, Loblaw said customers are noticing in those same Reddit groups that they're getting real value at our stores, often the best across the industry. So will avoiding Loblaw stores for the month make a difference to one of Canada's biggest grocery retailers? Probably not right away.
Whether or not their reputation has taken a hit or not is not going to actually impact their bottom line. It's going to take a lot more to bring down a Canadian retailer like this.
But if people switch to a rival...
The number one thing in retailing that you need is store traffic. And the last thing you want is your loyal customers to sample the competition. So I think on a secondary level, it could hurt Loblaw.
Alternatives are limited, though, in some parts of the country.
This is especially true for those that live in rural areas of Canada and smaller towns.
Champagne has been courting foreign grocers to enter the Canadian market.
What people want is more choice, which leads to better prices. And that's why you see, I always said to the end of the grocery chains in the country, listen to customers.
But so far, no deals.
The boycott begins on the heels of news that Ottawa's Grocery Task Force hasn't conducted any probes, and it doesn't have an enforcement mandate, even if it does uncover problems. Donna? All right, and Gaviola in Toronto, thanks. Shopping at London Drugs is still not an option. All of its stores remain closed for a fourth day. On Sunday, the retailer shut down across Western Canada because of what it calls a cybersecurity incident. It says it's working with a third-party cybersecurity expert, but has not explained exactly what happened. It promises to notify customers if any personal data was exposed. It's years behind schedule and tens of billions of dollars over budget, but oil is now flowing through the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, which the federal government bought in 2018. The expansion means more Canadian crude is now being shipped from Alberta to the BC coast. It nearly triples the flow of oil to 890,000 barrels per day, and it expands access to lucrative global markets beyond the U.S. Trans Mountain's original owner, Kinder Morgan, walked away from it, and Prime Minister Trudeau's decision to buy it for $4.5 billion was deeply controversial. The cost to complete it has since ballooned to a staggering $34 billion. Heather Yurix-West explains what Canadians are getting from that investment.
Controversial and expensive, twinning Western Canada's Trans Mountain Pipeline proved to be a nearly impossible task. Seeing its completion has many in Canada's energy sector breathing a heavy sigh of relief.
It's a big deal. We've been waiting for this for many years. It's hard to build big pipelines, and getting this done, although it's been very expensive and very delayed, is finally something that's going to give market access to Canada, which is one of the bigger oil producers in the world.
Until now, Canada has only been able to export its oil to North American markets, sending its heavy crude by pipeline or rail across Western Canada to the American Midwest or the Gulf Coast. But the TMX pipeline expansion will allow Canada to export directly to international customers via the Pacific Ocean, with new buyers in California, China, and India.
The average taxpayer will see some impact. This will bump our economy. I think it was the Bank of Canada that forecasted to bump the GDP at 5.25%. This one single project, which is a big deal.
Of course, as the owner of much of Canada's oil resource, Alberta stands to see the most financial gains, with provincial royalty payments tied to the price of Western Canadian crude, which because of its limited market access has sold at a steep discount.
Because we now have another customer to sell to, we're going to see higher prices for all of our Western Canada Select product. In the past, there's been a heavy discount. I've been told by my department officials it's probably a couple of $2 billion additional revenues that we can get.
While the new pipeline may be pumping, the TMX story is far from done. It's still owned by taxpayers, and Ottawa has made clear its intention to divest, with questions around how long the infrastructure will be profitable as the world makes its transition away from what's flowing inside. Heather Yurix-West, Global News, Calgary.
The leader of the official opposition was back in the House of Commons today after being kicked out yesterday for using language the Speaker of the House deemed unparliamentary. Here's a little bit of a taste from yesterday.
The leader opposite is showing us exactly what shameful, spineless leadership looks like. He shakes the hands of the leader of a white nationalist group and then goes to actively court support of the group's members and thinks he can get away with it.
That, like everything else he says, is false. When will we put an end to this wacko policy by this wacko Prime Minister?
No, there are a couple of things which are going on here today, which is not acceptable.
Well, Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre was ejected after that, and the rest of the Conservative caucus followed him. Today, they were all back, and our chief political correspondent David Aiken was watching to see how everyone would behave. David.
Well, Donna, if Tuesday's question period was remarkable for its rancor, today's was just as remarkable for its tranquility. Here's an example of the tone of today's exchanges.
Will he announce now that his experiment with legalizing hard drugs in BC is over? Yes or no?
It was like that for an hour. No name calling on any side. The backbenchers all staying silent, with little or no clapping and definitely no heckling. Everyone on their best behavior. The Conservatives say they took that approach because they want to focus on the drug crisis in BC and elsewhere, and were not interested in picking a spat with what they see as a partisan speaker, Liberal MP Greg Fergus. But the Prime Minister tried to pick a fight several times, repeating Tuesday's accusations that Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives pander to white nationalists.
The leader of the opposition has not answered Canadians' concerns about why he will not condemn Diagolon, the far-right extremist organization, why he will not reject the endorsement of Alex Jones, noted conspiracy theory.
The day before, those had been the opening salvos to that out-of-control question period. But today, Poilievre brushed off the bait and stuck to his focus, the drug crisis.
This is the Prime Minister who has to answer for the people who are dying every day due to his policies.
Now, speaking to some MPs from all parties, don't expect this perfectly civil approach to last. It really was a one-day response to Tuesday's tantrums. Expect a degree of heckling, cheering, and jeering to return as soon as Thursday's question period. Don?
Okay, David Aiken in Ottawa. Thanks, David. Winnipeg police say they have cracked what they say was an interprovincial drug network. Police call it a complex financial and criminal investigation. Investigators today showcased what they've seized: cash, guns, drugs, and jewelry. 14 people are facing charges related to organized crime. Police allege millions of dollars in illicit drugs and guns were being trafficked into Winnipeg from Toronto.
This network used various importation methods that include bus, rail, and airline companies, as well as highway-based couriers who used vehicles outfitted with custom-designed concealment compartments.
The investigation involved more than 10 police services across Canada, including Via Rail Police. A pro-Palestinian encampment at Montreal's McGill University will remain in place for now. A Quebec judge has rejected a request for an injunction that would have forced the protesters to leave. The request filed by two McGill students yesterday asked the court to ban protests within 100 meters of McGill's buildings. The students said the protests create a hostile environment on campus and were concerned for their safety. In a 10-page decision, the judge wrote there was insufficient evidence of the urgency in the request. Several universities in the U.S. have run out of patience with the protests. Classes at UCLA have been canceled after what happened last night. Police were deployed in force after supporters of Israel clashed with pro-Palestinian demonstrators. And at Columbia University in New York, hundreds of people were arrested after officers moved in there to clear protesters. While the demands among the protests protests vary. The majority are asking for their schools to divest from Israel in some form. Jackson Prosco reports on the escalating disruption.
You have been warned as per City College to leave the campus.
New York police descended on Columbia's campus after dark. Raiding the building, dozens of pro-Palestinian protesters had barricaded themselves inside, evicting and arresting nearly 300 people who had refused to leave.
Well, those who broke into the building did include students. It was led by individuals who are not affiliated with the university.
The university and police had become concerned by what they saw as a dangerous escalation. For weeks, Columbia has been the center of the national student protests.
It's not okay under any circumstance to send that many police onto campus.
Across the U.S., it's clear police and school administrators have reached a breaking point. In Madison, Wisconsin, fighting erupted as officers tried to remove tents Wednesday. At UCLA, a chaotic scene as pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian supporters sparred overnight.
We had people mazing us, beating us with bats and sticks, throwing whatever they could to us.
Nationwide, more than 1,400 people have now been arrested. The turmoil has spilled off campuses and into the political arena, where politicians are split on whether the protests constitute free speech or hate speech.
These students should be praised for standing up for what they believe in, not vilified.
These little Gazas are disgusting cesspools of anti-Semitic hate.
Back at Columbia, the tents are gone, but there are worries protesters could return. Police say they will remain on guard until students graduate later this month, capping off a tumultuous school year. Jackson Prosco, Global News, Washington.
In Gaza, World Central Kitchen has resumed operations a month after 7 of its aid workers were killed by Israeli airstrikes. The charity has nearly 300 trucks carrying about 8 million meals ready to enter at the Rafah crossing. In northern Gaza, aid is also finally getting through the Erez crossing, which Israel has reopened a month after it promised to do so to try to address the hunger crisis in Gaza. The American Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, is in the region for the 7th time since October 7th. He met with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu today, and again, he's urging Israel and Hamas to move ahead with a ceasefire proposal.
There is no time for delay. There's no time for further haggling. The deal is there. They should take it.
Blinken also restated American opposition to an Israeli invasion of Rafah without a plan to effectively protect civilians. Violence is erupting in Georgia tonight. That country's parliament moved a step closer to passing a law critics fear will stifle media freedom and endanger its bid to join the European Union. Riot police used water cannon, tear gas, and pepper spray on protesters who were trying to break into Parliament. It's been called the Foreign Agent Bill. The legislation calls for organizations to register as being under foreign influence if they receive more than 20% of their funding from abroad. The bill must pass one more vote before it becomes law. Arrested development coming up where Canada's most wanted fugitive was just caught and what he's accused of. The search for Canada's most wanted fugitive is over. He's been arrested in Prince Edward Island. On Tuesday night, police in Charlottetown caught 35-year-old Michael Beebe at a local business after receiving tips he was in PEI. There was a Canada-wide warrant for his arrest. He was wanted for second-degree murder in the fatal shooting of 29-year-old Shamar Powell Flowers. He was killed on the Danforth in Toronto in July of 2023. Beebe will now be transported back to Ontario in the coming days. And that means this guy moves up a notch to become Canada's most wanted fugitive. Al Boivin is wanted in Quebec for drug trafficking. Police in Saskatoon have started searching a landfill today as they look for the remains of a 22-year-old woman who has been missing for more than 3 years. Excavators, along with officers in full protective gear, were seen sifting through garbage this morning. It marks the beginning of what investigators say will be a month-long search for Mackenzie Lee Trottier. She was last seen in December of 2020.
The enormous amount of work that's going on behind us is staggering. The search is about Mackenzie, but it's also about missing people. No matter what their past is, they're human beings, and they deserve our attention.
Saskatoon police say new information led them to an area of interest in the landfill, about 930 cubic meters in size. As part of its 2024 budget, the federal government is moving ahead with changes to Canada's asylum claim system, which could speed up the deportation process. Canada has a record number of asylum seekers and a ballooning backlog of applications. Mackenzie Gray looks at what the changes are and what they could mean. Mackenzie.
Well, Donna, buried deep in the federal budget's legislation are 22 pages worth of changes to Canada's asylum system that the Liberals say will be big.
The budget promises to simplify and streamline the asylum claims process in support of faster decisions and quicker removals.
They are mostly public safety related. They are efficiencies within the system I think we can take a look at.
The efficiencies include increased powers to help the Canada Border Services Agency enforce removals, making it harder for denied refugee claimants to access other immigration streams, and simplify the process for minors to apply. But overall, only small changes.
I don't see anything revolutionary in here that's all of a sudden overnight going to clear the backlog. However, anything that you can do to make any step of the million steps of the process a little bit faster will have the end result of speeding up the system.
A system that's currently under major pressure. For the first 3 months of 2024, asylum claims are up 62% from the previous year, with over 46,000 new claims. The Immigration and Refugee Board backlog is now at a record 186,000 applicants, well over what they can handle.
The tribunal has admitted publicly they only have the capacity of dealing with 50,000 a year. They're resourced for that.
The federal budget does promise more cash to address the backlog, $750 million over 5 years, but if that doesn't help fix the system, the former immigration minister believes the Canadian consensus that immigration is a positive could be under threat.
I'm really worried about the last few months. It was surprising for me to see the backlog grow. It's going to take a big effort to get it back under control.
Despite new money and legislative changes, the current immigration minister was unwilling to put a target for how long asylum claims should take to process, Donna, but right now lawyers say it could take up to 3 years before claims decided.
All right, Mackenzie in Ottawa, thanks. Workers' rights ahead, how some May Day rallies in Europe turned violent. It is May 1st, recognized as May Day in many countries, when workers and activists mark workers' rights. Most of the protests today were peaceful, but in some places, tension boiled over. Istanbul, police there used tear gas and fired rubber bullets to disperse large crowds. They were trying to break through a barricade to reach Taksim Square in defiance of a ban on demonstrations there. 40,000 officers were deployed and more than 200 people were arrested. And this is Paris. Riot police moved in when protesters got out of hand. Demonstrators torched vehicles and damaged bus shelters. Police say at least 12 officers were hospitalized after a homemade explosive was set off. Who done it next? The mystery of a meal that drugged the cast and crew of the film Titanic. The story of the Titanic and how it went down has been told over and over again, but there is still a mystery around something that happened during the filming of the movie Titanic. Crew members working on that film in Nova Scotia back in 1996 got mysteriously high after eating seafood chowder. Heidi Petrachik reports on the new information that's come to light and the lingering question of who spiked the soup.
Titanic was an Oscar-winning blockbuster.
It's definitely the biggest movie I ever worked on.
And the movie's modern-day scenes were filmed in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia. Artist Marilyn McAvoy was there. That's her on the left.
I'll be goddamned.
The film is now well known for its emotionally explosive set and ballooning budget. But an incident in August of 1996 may not ring as familiar. That's when 80 crew members, McAvoy included, unknowingly ate drug-tainted lobster chowder on set.
You know, it was kind of like very dreamy, very surreal. I was still functioning. I wasn't, nauseous or anything like that. But it seemed like it affected people in many, many different ways. This is me, and this is Jim Cameron.
It took hours to triage and treat everyone at the ER, an experience star Bill Paxton would describe years later.
You see some people are freaking out, some people are Congo dancing, some people are euphoric. I knew I was pretty stoned on something pretty bad.
Everyone recovered. Nova Scotia health officials determined the chowder contained PCP, or angel dust, a hallucinogenic drug. Police investigated, but no one was ever charged. Now, more details are being revealed in an incident report released Monday by Halifax Police, following a ruling from the Provincial Privacy Commissioner. But there are no names and no clear culprit. According to the document, one witness told police a food services worker, quote, removed from the set for selling drugs a few days prior, could be a suspect. Officers couldn't confirm the worker's identity. Police also uncovered rumors the incident may have provided a reason to continue shooting for an additional week, with funding coming from an insurance claim. But the investigator writes none of this can be substantiated, adding, imagine the tabloid headlines.
Like many things that happened on that movie, I think it's just kind of become this kind of, lore.
But unlike the dramatic, now iconic ending to Titanic, it seems this story will remain without its Hollywood ending. Heidi Petrachik, Global News, Halifax.
Someone knows who did it. That is Global National for this Wednesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Year Canada is near Hinton, Alberta. Thanks for watching and hope to see you here again tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Thank you for watching and privilege of your time. This is Amir Shakil 5858. I am Amir Woodman. Have a good life.